I thought it was just my 68th birthday, until I noticed something was off. The morning started like any other Tuesday in September, the kind where the Arizona sun filters through the blinds at exactly 6:17, painting golden stripes across my bedroom floor. I've been waking up at that same time for 43 years, ever since I started working at the power plant. And even though I've been retired for 6 years now, my body still kept that clock. But this particular morning felt different. There was a weight in the air, something I couldn't quite name. If you ever had that feeling, that prickle at the back of your neck telling you something's coming, then you know exactly what I mean. And if you're watching this from somewhere in the world right now, drop a comment and let me know where you're from. I'd love to know whose ears are hearing this story today. My daughter Rachel had called me 3 times a day before, which wasn't unusual in itself. We talked regularly, but there was something in her voice, a brightness that felt forced, like she was reading from a script. She'd ask me what time I'd be home today, if I had any plans, whether I was expecting any visitors. At the time, I thought she was just being thoughtful, maybe planning something small for my birthday. Rachel had always been good about those things, ever since her mother passed away 11 years ago. She'd stepped into that role of making sure I didn't spend holidays alone, that I remembered to eat something other than frozen dinners, that I had reasons to leave the house. But standing there in my kitchen that morning, pouring coffee into the same chipped mug my late wife Sarah had given me in 1983, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The house was too quiet. I know that sounds strange. I lived alone. It was always quiet. But this was different. This was the kind of quiet that comes before something loud happens, the kind that makes you hold your breath without realizing it. I went through my morning routine on autopilot. Toast with butter, not too dark. Half a grapefruit with a spoonful of sugar, because Sarah used to say I was sweet enough without it, but I never listened. I took my blood pressure medication, my cholesterol pill, that little blue tablet for my heart that I'd been taking since the scare in 2019. The pills rattled in their bottles like tiny warnings. I remember thinking how strange it was that at 68, I'd become a walking pharmacy, my entire day structured around these little doses of staying alive. The phone rang at 8:30. Rachel again. Her voice came through bright and chipper, almost manic. She asked if I was excited about tonight, if I remembered that they were coming over. I told her, of course, I remembered, even though I hadn't remembered at all. She'd apparently mentioned it during one of those previous calls, but the details had slipped through my mind like water through a sieve. That had been happening more lately. The forgetting of small things, appointments, names of people I'd known for years, whether I'd already taken my morning pills or just thought about taking them. She said they'd be there at 7 o'clock sharp. She emphasized the word sharp in a way that felt important, though I couldn't understand why. She told me not to eat dinner, that they were bringing everything. She told me to just relax, to enjoy my day, to not worry about a single thing. That last part should have been my first real warning. Rachel knew me well enough to know that telling me not to worry was like telling the sun not to rise. I'd spent my entire adult life worrying. I worried about making ends meet when Rachel was young and Sarah was sick the first time. I worried about keeping the lights on and the roof intact. I worry about being a good enough father, a strong enough husband, a reliable enough man. Worry had carved grooves into my brain so deep that not worrying felt like forgetting how to breathe. After we hung up, I tried to settle into the day. I watched the morning news. More bad news from Washington. A wildfire in California. A shooting somewhere that made my chest hurt. I flipped to the game show channel and watched people spin wheels and guess letters. Their excitement over winning a washer-dryer set reminding me of simpler times. But I couldn't concentrate. My eyes kept drifting to the clock on the wall, watching the hands move with agonizing slowness towards 7 o'clock. Around noon, I decided to take a walk. The neighborhood was quiet, most people at work or hiding from the heat. I walked past houses I'd seen every day for 36 years, homes where I'd watched children grow up and move away, where I'd seen marriages begin and end, where I'd attended backyard barbecues and helped jumpstart dead car batteries. Mrs. Patterson was watering her roses, and she waved at me with that same sad smile she'd been giving me since Sarah's funeral. Mr. Chun, I stopped myself. Mr. Wilson was washing his truck, and he called out something about the weather. I waved back, but I didn't stop to chat. I couldn't. My mind was somewhere else. By the time I got back home, my shirt was stuck to my back with sweat, and my legs ached in that way that reminded me I wasn't 40 anymore, or 50, or even 60. I was 68 years old, and my body made sure I knew it with every step. I showered and changed into clean clothes. A button-down shirt Rachel had given me last Christmas, and a pair of khaki pants that still fit if I didn't breathe too deep. I combed what was left of my gray hair and stared at myself in the bathroom mirror. The face looking back at me was one I barely recognized anymore. When had I gotten so old? When had the lines around my eyes gotten so deep? The skin on my neck gotten so loose? When had I become this tired-looking stranger? 6:30 came and went, then 6:45. I sat in my recliner, the same one I'd sat in for 20 years, wearing grooves into the cushions that fit my body like a glove. The house was still too quiet. I turned on the television just to have noise, but I didn't actually watch it. My eyes were on the window, watching for headlights. At exactly 7 o'clock, I saw them pull up, Rachel's SUV, that big gray thing she bought last year that she was so proud of. But there was another car behind hers, a sleek black sedan I didn't recognize. My stomach tightened. Rachel got out first, and then him, Derek, my son-in-law of 4 years. I need you to understand something about Derek. From the moment Rachel brought him home to meet me, something about him had felt off. He was polite, always said the right things, always offered to help with this or that. He had a good job doing something with computers that I never fully understood, made good money, wore expensive watches, and drove expensive cars. On paper, he was exactly the kind of man any father would want for his daughter. But there was something in his eyes that never quite matched his smile. Something calculating. Something cold. Sarah would have seen it too. I was sure of that. She had a gift for reading people that I'd always envied. But Sarah wasn't here anymore, and Rachel seemed happy, so I kept my mouth shut and tried to be welcoming. They came to the door together, Rachel carrying a cake box and Derek carrying what looked like a briefcase. That should have been my second warning. Who brings a briefcase to a birthday dinner? I opened the door before they could knock, and Rachel's face lit up with that too bright smile again. She hugged me hard, and I could smell her perfume, the same one Sarah used to wear. It made my throat tight. Derek shook my hand with a grip that was just a touch too firm, held it just a moment too long. He looked me directly in the eye and wished me a happy birthday, but there was something in his gaze I couldn't read, something that made the hair on my arm stand up. They came inside, and that's when I noticed the other car's doors opening. 2 men in suits stepped out, strangers with serious faces and leather portfolios. Rachel saw me looking and quickly said they were friends of Derek's, that they'd just stopped by to say hello. But friends don't dress like lawyers and carry portfolios to birthday parties. The weight in the air that I'd felt all morning suddenly got heavier, pressing down on my chest like a hand. Rachel was talking about the cake, about how she'd gotten it from that bakery I liked downtown, about how they brought my favorite German chocolate. But her voice sounded far away, like she was speaking to me from the other end of a tunnel. Derek had moved past me into the living room, and the 2 men in suits followed him. They were looking around my house like they were assessing it, their eyes taking in the furniture, the walls, the lifetime of memories packed into every corner. Something was very, very wrong. And if you've ever had that moment when you suddenly realize you've walked into a trap, when everything clicks into place and you understand too late that you should have seen it coming, then you know the feeling that hit me right then. Standing in my own doorway, the taste of fear metallic in my mouth, watching my daughter set a birthday cake on my kitchen counter, while her husband and 2 strangers began spreading papers across my coffee table. This wasn't a birthday party. This was something else entirely. Derek asked me to sit down, and the way he said it, gentle but firm, like he was talking to a child, made my jaw clench. I'd been sitting in my own chairs for decades without anyone's permission, but something told me to comply, to see where this was going before I reacted. So I sat. Rachel wouldn't look at me. She'd busied herself in the kitchen, cutting the cake that nobody was going to eat, making small noises with plates and forks. The sound of her avoiding me. One of the suited men introduced himself as Timothy Bradford, an attorney. The other was Christopher Wells, a financial advisor. They settled onto my couch like they owned it, spreading their papers across the coffee table in organized piles. Derek stood behind them with his arms crossed, and suddenly I understood the power dynamic in the room. This was his show. These were his people. Timothy, he insisted I call him Tim, which I wouldn't, began explaining that they were here to help me. That word, help. It's amazing how sinister a kind word can sound when it's coming from a stranger's mouth in your own living room. He talked about my age, about the difficulties of managing finances at my stage of life. He mentioned this house, and how maintaining it must be becoming burdensome. He talked about health care costs and the rising expenses of aging, about memory issues and the challenges of living alone. Every word was carefully chosen, precisely aimed. I felt like I was watching someone build a cage around me, one bar at a time. Christopher chimed in with numbers. He'd somehow gotten access to information about my accounts, my pension, my Social Security, my savings. I wanted to ask how he knew these things, but the answer was obvious. Derek. Derek had wormed his way into my daughter's life, and through her into mine. And somewhere along the way, he'd gotten access to information that should have been private. They painted a picture of a man, me, who was struggling, declining, at risk. They used words like vulnerable and exposed and unprotected. They made my life sound like a disaster waiting to happen, when just that morning I'd been doing fine. I'd made my breakfast, taken my pills, gone for a walk. I'd been living the same life I'd been living for years. But they kept talking, their voices blending together into a single narrative of decline and danger. And then Derek finally spoke. He said they developed a solution, a way to protect me, to ensure I was taken care of, to remove the burden of financial management from my shoulders. He made it sound like a gift. He said that Rachel had been worried about me for months, that she'd noticed changes, that she'd asked him to help figure out a way to keep me safe. I looked at my daughter then, standing in my kitchen with tears running down her face, and I wanted to believe she'd been forced into this. But the tears weren't the kind you cry when you're being coerced. They were the kind you cry when you're guilty, when you know what you're doing is wrong, but you're doing it anyway. Timothy slid a stack of papers toward me across the coffee table. Power of attorney documents, financial management agreements, something about a reverse mortgage. The words blurred together as I tried to read them, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples. They were asking me to sign over control of everything. My house, my money, my entire life. Derek explained it all in that calm, reasonable voice of his. I would still live here, of course. Nothing would change in my day-to-day life. But they would handle the complicated stuff, the bills, the investments, the decisions. I could just relax and enjoy my retirement without all the stress. Rachel would make sure I was comfortable. Derek would ensure everything was managed properly. I'd be taken care of. It sounded so reasonable when he said it, so logical, so caring. But I'd spent 68 years on this earth, and I hadn't survived this long by being stupid. I knew exactly what this was. This was theft, dressed up in legal language and false concern. This was my daughter and her husband trying to take everything I'd spent a lifetime building. Everything Sarah and I had sacrificed for. Everything I planned to leave to Rachel anyway when I was gone. But they couldn't wait. They needed it now. I asked Rachel to come sit with me. My voice came out steady, which surprised me, because inside I was shaking. She wiped her eyes and walked over slowly, sitting on the arm of my recliner, like she used to when she was a little girl. I asked her to explain to me, in her own words, why this was happening. She couldn't. She opened her mouth several times, but nothing came out except more tears. Derek answered for her, saying she was just emotional because she loved me so much, because this was hard for her too, because she only wanted what was best for me. I asked Timothy if I had to sign these papers tonight. He said no. Of course not. I could take time to think about it. But Derek interrupted him and said, actually, yes, it would be better if we finalized everything tonight. They'd gone to a lot of trouble to arrange this meeting, to coordinate everyone's schedules. And there were some time-sensitive issues, something about property taxes and insurance deadlines. More lies wrapped in urgency. I stood up and Rachel practically jumped away from me. I'm not a big man, never have been, and at 68, I'm even smaller than I used to be. But when I stood up in that moment, I felt 10 feet tall. I felt every year of my life settling into my bones like armor. I told them no, just that one word. No. The room went silent. Derek's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Something dangerous. Timothy started to say something about how I should really consider this carefully, about how I might not get another opportunity for this kind of protection. But I cut him off. I said that I'd built this life. Sarah and I had bought this house in 1989, had painted every room ourselves, had planted a tree in the backyard that was now tall enough to shade the whole patio. I'd worked for 43 years, had saved every penny I could, had made sacrifices so Rachel could go to college, so she could have a better life than we did. And I sure as hell wasn't going to hand it all over to a man I barely knew, because he convinced my daughter I was too old to manage my own affairs. Derek's jaw tightened. This wasn't going according to his plan. He tried a different approach, his voice getting harder, losing that fake warmth. He talked about my memory lapses, about how I'd forgotten our dinner tonight, about how Rachel had told him I sometimes forgot to pay bills on time. He made it sound like I was incompetent, like I was a danger to myself. And that's when I realized just how deep this went. They'd been building a case against me for months, maybe longer. Every time I've forgotten some small detail, every time I've been a little confused about a date or a time, Rachel had been reporting back to Derek. They'd been documenting my supposed decline, creating a narrative they could use against me if I didn't cooperate. If you've been watching up until now, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because this story gets darker before it gets better, and I think you're going to want to see how it ends. Check the description below for more stories like this one. Real stories from real people about the betrayals that break us and the strength it takes to fight back. I looked at Rachel and asked her directly, did she really think I was incompetent? Did she really believe I couldn't take care of myself? Or was this just about the money? She couldn't answer. She just cried harder, and I had my answer. Derek stood up, and so did Timothy and Christopher. The meeting was over. Derek said they'd give me a few days to think about it, to come to my senses. He said we could do this the easy way or the hard way, but either way, it was going to happen. He said he was going to make sure Rachel got what she deserved, what she'd been promised. What she'd been promised. Not what I'd promised her. What Derek had promised her. He'd gotten into her head, had convinced her that she should have access to my assets now, that waiting for me to die was unnecessary and unfair. He'd poisoned her against me, turned my own daughter into a weapon. They left their papers on my coffee table like a threat. Rachel tried to hug me on her way out, but I stepped back. The look on her face when I did that, it was pure devastation. But I was devastated too. I was standing in the ruins of my family, watching my only child walk out my door with a man who was trying to rob me blind. After they left, I stood at my window and watched their taillights disappear down the street. The house was quiet again, but this time the quiet was different. It was the quiet of being completely alone. The quiet of realizing that the people you love most in the world might not love you back the same way. I was 68 years old, and I had just been ambushed in my own home on my own birthday by my own daughter. But I wasn't dead yet, and I wasn't defeated yet. If Derek wanted a war, he was about to get one. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my recliner until dawn, the papers they left scattered across my coffee table, like evidence of a crime. Because that's what it was. Attempted elder abuse, exploitation, manipulation. They'd tried to dress it up in legal language, but I knew what I'd seen. The question was, what was I going to do about it? At 6:30 the next morning, I called my old friend William. We'd worked together at the power plant for 37 years, had been through strikes and layoffs and near-death accidents together. If there was anyone I could trust, it was Bill. He answered on the second ring, his voice rough with sleep, and I told him I needed help. Within an hour, he was sitting at my kitchen table, reading through the papers with a scowl on his face that deepened with every page. Bill had a daughter too, and 2 sons. He understood family complications, but even he was shocked by what he was reading. He looked up at me and said just one word, lawyer. I'd never needed a lawyer before. Sarah and I had lived simple lives. We paid our taxes, followed the rules, stayed out of trouble. The only legal document I'd ever signed was our mortgage and our wills. But Bill knew someone, a woman named Patricia Brennan, who'd helped his sister with an estate issue. He called her right there from my kitchen, explained the situation, and she agreed to meet with me that afternoon. Patricia's office was in one of those old downtown buildings with creaky wooden floors and tall windows that let in too much sun. She was maybe in her mid-50s, with sharp eyes and a firm handshake. She listened to my story without interrupting, taking notes in careful handwriting that reminded me of Sarah's. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked me the question I've been dreading. "Are you sure you want to fight this?" Because if Derek has been planning this, he's probably thought through the next several moves. And Rachel is your daughter. Fighting them could mean losing her forever. I thought about that all night. I thought about Christmas mornings and birthday parties, about teaching Rachel to ride a bike and walking her down the aisle at her wedding. I thought about the grandchildren I'd hoped to have someday, about the family dinners and holiday traditions I'd imagined continuing. Fighting Derek meant risking all of that. But then I thought about Sarah, about the sacrifices she'd made, the years she worked 2 jobs while battling cancer, so we could save for Rachel's education. I thought about my own father, who died with nothing because he trusted the wrong people and lost everything. I thought about the principle of it, about what it meant to just roll over and let someone take what you'd spent a lifetime building. I told Patricia I was sure. I wanted to fight. She laid out the reality for me. Derek was smart. He'd covered his bases. The documents he brought were legally sound. And if I'd signed them, there would have been very little I could do to reverse them later. But I hadn't signed, which meant I still had control. The problem was Derek wouldn't just give up. He'd try again, probably with a different strategy. Patricia explained that Derek could potentially file for guardianship, claiming I was mentally incompetent to manage my affairs. He'd use Rachel's testimony about my memory issues, maybe get a doctor to evaluate me, paint a picture of a declining old man who needed protection from himself. If he succeeded, a court could grant him control regardless of what I wanted. But she said we could fight that too. We could get my own medical evaluation, showing I was competent. We could document that I was managing my life just fine. We could expose Derek's true motivations. It would be expensive and ugly and painful, but it was possible. I hired her on the spot. The next few weeks were a blur of appointments and paperwork. I went to my doctor, Dr. Helen Porter, who'd been treating me for 15 years. I explained what was happening, and she was appalled. She ran a full cognitive assessment, tested my memory, my reasoning, my judgment. I passed everything. She wrote a detailed letter stating that while I had some normal age-related memory changes, I was fully competent to manage my own affairs. That letter became one of our most important weapons. Patricia also suggested I change my will and my beneficiaries, not to cut Rachel out entirely. She advised against that, but to add protections. We created a trust that would ensure Rachel inherited when I died, but with conditions that prevented Derek from accessing it. We added language that explicitly stated I was of sound mind when making these changes. We built a fortress around my assets. During all of this, Rachel called me 17 times. I counted. I didn't answer. She left voicemails that broke my heart, crying, apologizing, saying she just wanted to talk. But Patricia had advised me not to communicate with her without a witness present, and I followed that advice. Every ignored call felt like a knife in my chest, but I had to protect myself. Then Derek made his next move. A process server showed up at my door on a Tuesday morning. Derek had filed for guardianship, just like Patricia had predicted. The documents claimed I was suffering from dementia, that I was unable to care for myself, that I posed a danger to my own well-being. Rachel had signed an affidavit supporting his claims. My own daughter had put her name to a legal document calling me incompetent. If you're still watching, I want you to know something. The pain of betrayal from a stranger is nothing compared to betrayal from someone you love. It's a physical sensation, like someone reaching into your chest and squeezing your heart until you can't breathe. And if this story is resonating with you, if you've experienced something similar, please share it. because people need to understand that this happens more often than anyone wants to admit. We had 30 days to respond to the guardianship petition, which meant 30 days to build our case. Patricia was brilliant. She subpoenaed Derek's financial records and discovered something beautiful. He was broke, not struggling, not having a rough month, completely, utterly broke. His fancy job had ended 6 months ago. He'd been living off credit cards, building up massive debt, keeping up appearances while drowning. That expensive car he drove, leased, and 3 months behind on payments. The nice watch? Fake. Bought online for $200. He needed my money. He needed it desperately. And he convinced Rachel that this was about caring for me, about protecting me, when really it was about saving himself. But we found something even better. We found emails between Derek and Christopher Wells, the supposed financial advisor. They'd been planning this for almost a year, carefully documenting every time I forgot something, every time I seemed confused, building their case. But in those emails, Derek had been sloppy. He'd written things like, "Once we get control of the old man's assets, and this will solve all our problems." He'd spelled out his true intentions in black and white. Patricia practically glowed when she saw those emails. She called them a gift. I called them exactly what I needed to destroy him. We scheduled the guardianship hearing for November 3rd, about 6 weeks after my birthday ambush. Those 6 weeks were the longest of my life. I barely ate, barely slept. I kept myself busy by documenting everything, making lists of my daily activities, saving receipts to prove I could manage money, taking photos of my clean house and full refrigerator. I was building evidence of my competence, piece by piece. Bill came over most days, keeping me company, making sure I ate something. Mrs. Patterson brought me casseroles. Even Mr. Wilson stopped by to say he'd testify on my behalf if needed, to say that I seemed perfectly fine to him. My neighbors rallied around me in a way that reminded me I wasn't actually alone, even when my own family had abandoned me. 3 days before the hearing, Rachel showed up at my door. Not Derek, just Rachel. She looked terrible, thin, pale, with circles under her eyes. She begged me to let her in, to let her explain. Against my better judgment, I did. She sat on my couch, the same couch where Derek and his lawyers had spread their papers, and she told me everything, about how Derek had lost his job and hadn't told her for months, about how the bills had piled up, how they'd lost their savings, how they were about to lose their house, about how Derek had convinced her that I wouldn't live much longer anyway. I was 68, after all, and that it made more sense to them to have access to my assets now, when they really needed them rather than waiting for me to die. She said it like it was reasonable, like planning for my death and taking my money early was just being practical. I asked her if she understood what she'd done, if she understood that she'd tried to steal my life from me, to declare me incompetent, to take everything Sarah and I had built. I asked her if money was really more important than her father. She cried and said she never meant to hurt me, that Derek had made it sound like we were helping me, that she'd gotten confused about what was right. She said she'd filed for divorce, that she was leaving him, that she wanted to drop the guardianship case and make things right. But I'd learned something important in those 6 weeks. Intentions don't erase actions. She might not have meant to hurt me, but she had. She'd signed legal documents against me. She'd participated in an attempt to steal my autonomy, and the fact that she now regretted it didn't change what she'd done. I told her I'd see her in court. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, just a regular room with paneling and fluorescent lights that hummed too loud. I sat next to Patricia at a table that wobbled slightly when I put my hands on it, and across the room sat Derek with his lawyer, a slick-looking man in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Rachel was sitting in the back row, alone. She'd followed through on filing for divorce, but Derek had fought her on dropping the guardianship case. He said he had a fiduciary duty to protect me, which was the most absurd thing I'd ever heard come out of a human mouth. The judge was a woman named Margaret Foster, maybe in her early 60s, with reading glasses on a chain and a no-nonsense expression. She'd reviewed all the documents beforehand, including Dr. Porter's evaluation, my financial records showing I'd been managing everything perfectly, and those beautiful emails where Derek had spelled out his real intentions. Derek's lawyer went first, painting a picture of a confused old man living alone, struggling with memory issues, vulnerable to exploitation. He emphasized my age like it was a disease. He talked about the natural decline that comes with aging, about the risks I faced, about how much better off I'd be with professional management of my affairs. Then Patricia stood up. She presented Dr. Porter's evaluation. She showed bank statements proving I'd been paying all my bills on time, managing my accounts responsibly, making reasonable financial decisions. She had sworn statements from Bill, from my neighbors, from my pharmacist, who confirmed I picked up my medications regularly and never seemed confused. She built a picture of a competent man, living a normal life. Then she brought out the emails. She read them aloud in that courtroom, Derek's own words exposing his motivations. She showed his financial records, his debts, his lies. She documented how he'd systematically manipulated Rachel, how he'd fabricated a narrative of my decline to justify stealing my assets. I watched Derek's face as his own words were read back to him. He tried to maintain his composure, but I saw the moment he knew he'd lost. His lawyer kept objecting, kept trying to argue that the emails were taken out of context, but Judge Foster just looked at him over her reading glasses and told him to sit down. When Patricia finished, the judge asked me directly if I wanted to speak. I hadn't planned to. Patricia had advised me to let her do the talking, but suddenly I had things I needed to say. I stood up, and my voice shook at first, but then it got stronger. I talked about my life, about Sarah, about the 43 years I worked without missing a day. I talked about raising Rachel, about the sacrifices we made, about the love we poured into her. I talked about what it felt like to be 68 years old and have your own child try to take everything from you because she married a man who needed money. I said that getting old doesn't make you stupid, and it doesn't make you property to be managed. I said that I'd earned the right to live my life on my own terms, to make my own decisions, to maintain my dignity and autonomy until the day I died. And I said that if this was what family had become, children circling their parents like vultures, waiting to pick the bones clean, then maybe it was better to be alone. Rachel was sobbing in the back row, but I didn't look at her. I couldn't. Judge Foster took about 3 minutes to make her decision. She denied the guardianship petition completely. She said that I was clearly competent, that there was no evidence of cognitive decline that would warrant such extreme measures, and that Derek's motivations were transparently financial. She said it was one of the more obvious cases of attempted exploitation she'd seen, and she was glad I had good legal representation. Then she did something I didn't expect. She asked Derek to stand, and she lectured him. She talked about elder abuse, about how it was a growing problem, about how predators like him target vulnerable seniors and their families. She said that while he hadn't technically broken any laws yet, because I'd refused to sign his papers, his intentions were clear and reprehensible. She said she was making note of this case in the event that any future complaints arose involving him. It wasn't a criminal conviction, but it was something. It was a judge calling him exactly what he was, a predator. After the hearing, Patricia and I stood in the hallway outside the courtroom. She shook my hand and told me I'd done well, that I should be proud of myself for fighting back. But I didn't feel proud. I felt exhausted and sad, and about 100 years old. Rachel caught me before I could leave. She asked if we could talk, really talk, somewhere private. Part of me wanted to say no, to walk away and never look back. But she was still my daughter, under all the hurt and betrayal. She was still the little girl I'd taught to ride a bike, the teenager I'd help with homework, the young woman I'd walk down the aisle. We went to a coffee shop 2 blocks from the courthouse, one of those chain places with uncomfortable chairs and music playing too loud. We sat across from each other with cups of coffee. Neither of us drank, and she apologized. Really apologized. Not the deflecting kind where people say, "I'm sorry you feel that way," but the real kind where they take responsibility. She said Derek had manipulated her, had taken advantage of her trust and her love. She said he'd started slow, mentioning little things about my age, planting seeds of doubt. He'd convinced her that helping him was the same as helping me, that taking control of my finances was an act of love rather than an act of theft. By the time she realized what was really happening, she was already too deep in a back out without admitting she'd been wrong. But She said she was admitting it now. She was wrong. She betrayed me in the worst way possible, and she'd spend the rest of her life trying to make it up to me. I asked her what she wanted from me. Forgiveness? Money? A relationship? She said she didn't know. She said she just needed me to know that she was sorry, that she understood what she'd done, that she was going to be better. She said she'd already moved out of the house she'd shared with Derek, was staying with a friend, had filed for divorce, and wasn't asking for anything from him. She said she was starting over, trying to rebuild her life into something she could be proud of. I told her the truth, that I didn't know if I could forgive her. That trust, once broken, was almost impossible to rebuild. That at 68 years old, I didn't have unlimited time to work through betrayal. That maybe this was just how our story ended, with both of us damaged, going our separate ways. She nodded like she understood, and maybe she did. We finished our coffee in silence, and then we went our separate ways. I haven't seen her since. She calls sometimes, and sometimes I answer. We have short, awkward conversations about the weather and her new job, and whether I'm eating enough vegetables. We don't talk about Derek or the guardianship case or that terrible birthday. We just exist in each other's orbits, connected but distant, family by blood, but strangers by choice. It's been almost a year now since my 68th birthday. I'm 69 years old, living in the same house, managing my own life just fine. Bill still comes over regularly. Mrs. Patterson still brings me casseroles she claims she accidentally made too much of. Mr. Wilson still waves from his driveway when I take my walks. I changed my will after everything's settled. Rachel is still the beneficiary. She's my daughter, and despite everything, I can't bring myself to cut her out completely. But the trust has strict conditions now. She can't access anything until I'm gone, and even then, it's structured so that no future spouse can touch it. Patricia made sure of that. It's my final act of protection, I suppose, protecting Rachel from herself and from anyone else who might try to use her. Derek disappeared from our lives completely after the divorce was finalized. I heard through the grapevine, because small communities talk, and even at my age I still have friends who hear things, that he moved to Nevada, that he's remarried already. I feel sorry for his new wife, whoever she is. She doesn't know what she's gotten herself into. But that's not my problem anymore. The hardest part isn't the money or the legal battles or even the betrayal itself. It's the loneliness. I thought I'd gotten used to being alone after Sarah died, but that was different. That was loss through death, through circumstances beyond anyone's control. This is loss through choice, through actions that could have been prevented. This is sitting in my house on holidays knowing that my daughter is somewhere out there, alive and well, and we're still not together. On my 69th birthday last month, I had dinner with Bill and his wife Martha. They made pot roast and chocolate cake, and we played cards until midnight. It was nice. It wasn't what I'd imagined my life would look like at this age, but it was something. It was people who cared about me, people I could trust, people who saw my worth beyond my bank account. I've learned some things this past year, things I wish I'd known earlier. I learned that family isn't always safe, that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty, that the people closest to you can hurt you the deepest. I learned that getting old doesn't mean giving up, that you can be 68 or 70 or 80 and still have fight left in you, still have the right to control your own life. I learned that sometimes love isn't enough, that you can love someone with every piece of your heart and they can still betray you, that loving someone doesn't mean letting them destroy you. But I also learned that there's strength in standing up for yourself, even when it costs you everything, that dignity matters, that autonomy matters, that your life belongs to you until your last breath. I learned that real friends show up when things get hard, that community can exist outside of family, that you can rebuild after devastation if you're willing to do the work. Sometimes late at night, I think about calling Rachel. I think about trying harder to bridge the gap between us, to rebuild what was broken. But then I remember sitting in that courtroom, listening to the emails she'd supported, the legal documents she'd signed declaring me incompetent, the betrayal she participated in. And I remember that some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Some relationships, once poisoned, can't be cured. Maybe that makes me unforgiving. Maybe it makes me bitter. Or Maybe it just makes me realistic. Maybe it makes me someone who knows his worth and refuses to accept less than he deserves, even from his own daughter. I still take my pills every morning. I still drink coffee from Sarah's chip mug. I still walk through the neighborhood and wave at the same neighbors. My life looks almost exactly like it did before that terrible birthday, at least from the outside. But inside, everything is different. I'm different. I'm warier now, more guarded. I don't trust as easily. I don't assume that people mean well just because they say the right words. Is that sad? Maybe, but it's also survival. It's what 68 years on this earth has taught me. That you have to protect yourself, because not everyone who claims to love you actually does. That you have to stand up for yourself, because no one else is going to do it for you. That you have to know your worth, because plenty of people will try to convince you that you're worth less than you are, so they can take what's yours. Dr. Porter tells me I'm in good health for my age. My heart is strong. My mind is sharp. I could have another 10 years, another 20 if I'm lucky. And I plan to live every single one of those years on my own terms, making my own decisions, maintaining my own autonomy. No one is going to take that from me again. I think about Sarah sometimes, about what she would say if she could see how everything turned out. Part of me thinks she'd be heartbroken about Rachel, about the fracture in our family. But another part thinks she'd be proud of me for fighting back, for refusing to be a victim, for standing up even when it cost me my relationship with our daughter. Sarah was always stronger than she looked, always fiercer than people expected. Maybe some of that rubbed off on me. The house is quiet as I write this. It's a Saturday evening, and the sun is setting through my living room window, painting everything gold and orange. The same light that's been coming through this window for 36 years, landing on furniture that's been here almost as long. There's comfort in that continuity, in the sameness of things. My life may have been turned upside down, but the sun still rises and sets, the seasons still change, and I'm still here, still standing, still fighting, still living my life on my own terms. If you've made it this far in my story, thank you for listening. Thank you for bearing witness to what happened to me, for understanding that elder abuse isn't always obvious, that family betrayal is real and devastating and more common than anyone wants to admit. If this story resonated with you, if you've experienced something similar or know someone who has, please share it. Please talk about it, because the more we shine light on these situations, the harder it becomes for predators like Derek to operate in the shadows. And if you're someone who's currently fighting this kind of battle, someone who's being pressured to give up control of your life, someone whose family is circling like vultures, someone who's being told you're too old or too confused or too incompetent to manage your own affairs, I want you to hear this. Fight back. Get a lawyer. Document everything. Trust your instincts. You're not crazy, you're not paranoid, and you're not alone. Age doesn't make you worthless. It doesn't make you property. It doesn't mean you lose the right to live your life with dignity and autonomy. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise, not even, especially not, your own family. I'm 69 years old now. I've been through a war and come out the other side scarred, but standing. My relationship with my daughter may never recover. I may spend the rest of my birthdays with friends instead of family. I may die alone in this house, someday with nobody to hold my hand. But I'll die free. I'll die knowing I fought for myself, that I refuse to be a victim, that I maintain my dignity until the very end. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that has to be enough. The sun has set now. The room is getting dark. I should turn on a lamp. Start thinking about dinner. Bill and Martha invited me over tomorrow for Sunday brunch, and I think I'll go. Life goes on, even after betrayal, even after loss, even after everything falls apart. You just have to keep getting up every morning. You just have to keep fighting. You just have to keep remembering that your life is yours and nobody, not your children, not their spouses, not lawyers or judges or anyone else, has a right to take it from you. That's what I learned for my 68th birthday. That's what I carry with me now as I move through what's left of my life. And if sharing my story helps even one person stand up for themselves, helps even one person recognize the warning signs, helps even one person fight back against exploitation, then maybe all of this pain meant something. Maybe that's how we heal the wounds that never fully close, by turning them into warnings for others, by making our suffering count for something, by refusing to let the predators win. Check the description box below for more stories like this one. Real stories from real people about betrayal, survival, and the strength it takes to keep going when everything falls apart. Because these stories matter. Your story matters. And none of us are as alone as we sometimes feel. Thank you for listening to mine.